I mentioned to you that my new socials are self-hosted on
Mm-hmm.
an instance of link stacks. What do you think about self-hosting everything?
Link
Like, it's not a question.
stacks.
It's just like
Ooh.
opinions on self-hosting everything, bringing everything in-house rather than relying on third parties.
I've had this
I'm
discussion with
curious
a
because
couple of people. I will self-host things in cases where I think it adds value. Yeah, basically, I think it adds value to my use case effectively. Um, for a lot of
like, do you
things.
think
Oh, go on.
like, sorry, but I was gonna ask, do you think self-hosting one's website would be a good idea?
That's what I do. Um,
Oh, you self-host you self-host your website?
I don't.
Your
I don't use my own hardware, but I have like I set it up on a VPS. I do Nginx all that stuff like my app by
okay.
myself.
I was expecting this
Mm-hmm.
because there's a current debate. I don't know if you heard of DB Tech. DB Tech, David is an amazing guy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he talks he's all about self-hosting. His whole
Mm-hmm.
channel is about self-hosting. I learned a lot through him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's a current debate where hosting anything on a VPS is not called self-hosting. Self-hosting is when you
Right.
host things internally in-house on your own hardware, not
Mm-hmm.
on hardware on the cloud. That's just using a web host.
Right.
So there's this whole debate. I was expecting this because the question was asked and that answer was given, and it stirred a whole debate for 2.5 hours. But I host everything on a mini PC, although I have power outages and everything, but we have a generator, so
Mm-hmm.
it's all good. Uh, I currently moved everything except my website to the mini PC. I host my website on GitHub. It's Hugo. It's easy
Mm-hmm.
with GitHub Actions. Done deal. But anything other than my website, I brought everything in house. I used to use a VPS like yourself
Mm-hmm.
for specifically for Vault Warden because I need that accessible at all times.
Right.
But then since power started being more stable here, I decided to bring it all in house. I canceled my VPS.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all hosted on a mini PC inside a Proxmox machine, like I said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
on an Arch server.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a crazy person like that, but it works as long as it works. But now I discovered through DB Tech that we can do Proxmox LXCs.
Mm-hmm.
Isolate each Docker container on a separate VM. That way, if that specific container goes down, it doesn't bring down the whole entire system.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be migrating to that as soon as I can. But for now, everything is in-house. I prefer it that way because it gives me way more control
Right. I
over everything, like specifically password managers.
Right. I think the distinction here is whether you care about the idea of a home lab. Home lab is basically just you have physical hardware. Like people want to use this fancy home lab term. It just means you have a physical hardware you host things on. I don't particularly care about that. I understand why people like that as a hobby, and I understand the additional, you know, I guess accessibility you have to it because it's your hardware. But I don't think there is an important distinction to be made when you're self-hosting something on a VPS or you're self-hosting something on your own system. I think this is sort of adding too much additional baggage to the problem.
I tend to agree with that assumption,
Mm.
and the also when
To,
you host it in-house,
mm,
when it comes to security,
mm,
not as secure as when you host it on a VPS, because on a VPS you are given more tools to work with, especially when it comes to security. When you host everything in-house, unless
mm,
you have the hardware to back it up,
mm,
putting things behind things like Authelia, which is an authentication thing, or behind things like Authelia, Authentic,
Mm-mm.
it's not secure enough. It's
Sure.
just one layer on top. People can still hack their way in.
Mm.
Whereas if you rely on Cloudflare's security, for example, or a VPS's security hardware, this is where you are more secure,
Sure.
especially when it comes to your own private stuff, instances like Vault Warden, like Portainer, and stuff like that.
Mm.
But I see it as two-sided, because to get those functionalities, you have to fork up the money,
Mm.
which is not possible for everyone.
Right.
So for now, as a start, as you said, as a hobby, it's great, but as a serious thing, not so great,
Right.
because you add more baggage, more layers on top, and you have to maintain yourself, because as DB Tech mentioned it, sometimes when you deploy a container using the latest flag is not always the best idea, because it starts acting kind of like Arch.
Mm-mm.
Uh, when sometimes you get the latest version, which is incompatible with the MySQL database or SQLite database that it's using, it causes a lot of it might cause a lot of issues.
Mm-mm.
So you have to maintain. There's a lot of maintenance involved when it comes to in-house. When
Mm-hmm.
you go to VPS and you use the right flags and everything, you're good to go. You don't have to mess with things. And if you use Watchtower to update your containers, don't make it automatically update. Just let it notify you, and you decide if you should update or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the AUR. Only install packages from the AUR if you trust them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't install them willy-nilly. So there's a lot of parallels in this situation with Arch,
Mm-hmm.
specifically with Arch to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, but bringing some things in-house can be beneficial. Not everything. Don't
Right.
put all your eggs in one basket. That's my motto. But self-hosting is fun.
Sure. Yeah.
That's
I think it's.
I tend to.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I just kind of think the requirement that you need to have it on your own hardware is kind of just like excessively gatekeepy, and sort of it makes it harder to encourage people to even do this in the first place, right? Because if you're gonna say, oh, it's not self-hosting unless you do it on your own hardware, well, that increases the barrier to entry to even consider, okay, do I want to self-host? Because you can, get a $5 VPS and spin up some basic thing. But if you're gonna say, well, you need to buy, at even like a $200 computer just to host something on, right? Like that's something which is going to stop a lot of people even considering it as something that they might want to try.